I am Jason Williams, and I'm the current president of the Bitcoin Association of Australia. I'm also running a Bitcoin startup called BitPos, and we're a merchant payment gateway. We let merchants accept Bitcoin and receive Aussie dollars, pretty much. I started a little bit of history about me. I really got interested in Bitcoin at the end of 2012. I saw all the headlines of the Silk Road and went, oh, let's have a bit of a look at this. And I had a bit of a look at it and realized that if you take away the illicit nature of what Bitcoin is, and you look at the market that was, well, the illicit nature of what Bitcoin was actually facilitating, is a better way of saying it, and you look at what's happening, it was really apparent to me there was an amazing way to actually transact internationally between actors that are essentially not trusting each other, are fairly unscrupulous, I suppose. And so that really captured my attention. And I started consuming every single piece of Bitcoin media I could for about 6 months or so, and annoyed all my colleagues at the time, and they got shitty with me. And then started up the Bitcoin Sydney group, become a founding member of the Bitcoin Association, started up BitPos, and then later on last year, in 2014, started up something called Bitcoin Professionals, which is targeting a different audience. That's a little bit about me. Can I get a bit of feedback about who knows about Bitcoin and how much?
Well, I know nothing, so there's one.
Sorry, I can't really hear you.
Just that microphone.
You want to try speaking again?
Yeah, so I know nothing personally.
Okay, no, nothing?
Yeah, I know a bit, but I got on board when the blockchain was cool.
You don't know what the blockchain is?
No, I do. Yeah, but I got a Bitcoin when it was running out.
You got a Bitcoin when it was running out. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get in time.
Oh, there's always time. There's always time.
Yeah, if you got cycles, CPU cycles, and that. Yeah.
Okay, so let me share this with you. This is going to be feel a little ad hoc, so my apologies. Okay, so essentially the Bitcoin network is a distributed network. It's kind of like torrents, I suppose, in that no one actually owns any of it, and anyone is free to participate. That means that everyone who's running a full node, with what's called a full node, has a complete copy of the blockchain, which is essentially a public ledger of every single transaction that's happened, and will ultimately be the public ledger for every single transaction that is going to occur as well. The interesting part about the blockchain is no one owns it, and everyone owns it. Everyone can participate. It's the single biggest important invention with Bitcoin is the fact that the blockchain provides an indelible evidentiary trail. It's a really nice way of saying once you've put something on the blockchain, then you can't remove it. And essentially, that's a Byzantine general's problem that was solved. So it's the first time that's been solved in computer science history, and it's an amazingly important invention. Incidentally, cops are kind of scared about the blockchain technology right now, or are scared about Bitcoin right now. But I was at a conference, anti-money laundering conference last week in Melbourne, and I talked to some federal police down there, and I presented about the blockchain and Bitcoin, and at the end of that, they were like, yeah, this is actually kind of cool. It means that with due process, if the police, any of the police, find some evidence of a crime being committed through Bitcoin, and they can trace that Bitcoin address back to a particular person, via a wiretap or however they do it, then any transactions flowing on from that can actually be traced, like absolutely traced, and used as forensic evidence in court. Well, that hasn't been tested yet. Any questions on the blockchain so far?
No.
Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep.
I really like talking to a small group of people, by the way. You're all awesome.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what the blockchain is. That was a bit of a primer. Essentially, what happens is when you broadcast a transaction to the Bitcoin network, it hits a full node, and a full node is essentially the Bitcoin reference client that holds the entire blockchain, which is about 30 gigs or so at this point in time. Once the transactions hit the network, it'll be picked up by a miner, a Bitcoin miner, and it'll be included in a block. And that block will actually be confirmed over time by other miners who will solve the particular problem. I'm not going to get into the technical detail of how that works, but essentially, at a high level, you make a Bitcoin transaction, it's broadcast to the network, the miner will scoop up your transaction and include it in a block, and then that block will be appended to the blockchain. And then for every subsequent block that's appended, prepended in front of the other blocks. And so as time goes on, your transaction goes further and further down the chain, and it's generally accepted that after 6 confirmations, that your transaction will be there forever. I say it's generally accepted. For the most case, it'll be there forever anyway. There are cases where you can do things called 51% attacks. They're actually technically very difficult, and I'm not sure there's been any successful cases of those at this point in time. I can't remember any off the top of my head. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Given a little bit of a picture there?
Yep.
Cool. Oh, excellent. So I've already touched on this next slide. Come on, screen share. There we go. What makes the blockchain so damn special? It's that evidentiary trail that I was talking about before. It means that once you've made a transaction on using Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network, then that transaction is ostensibly there forever. And what makes Bitcoin better over the other altcoins? Well, anything that's not a Bitcoin is called an altcoin, an alt, ALT, alternative currency. And so what makes Bitcoin particularly better over the others is the network security. And when I mean networks, when I'm talking about network security, I don't mean stuff like TCP/IP or BGP or border routers or any of that kind of stuff. What I mean is the Bitcoin network itself has a lot of computing power in order to secure that network. So it means that if someone wanted to come in and disrupt the network, like a bad actor or an irrational actor wanted to come in and disrupt the network, it would actually cost them in the order of, at this point in time, in the order of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to produce the required hardware to actually disrupt the network. When we're talking about others like Litecoin or Dogecoin or Feathercoin or Peercoin or Barbecue Coin or whatever any of the others are, their network security isn't as strong. So it's not trivial, but it's much easier for an actor to come in or even a bunch of actors using a coordinated approach to disrupt and attack that network, essentially being able to rewrite history. So what makes a blockchain so damn special is the evidence, but what makes Bitcoin so damn special? It's the network security. Make sense to everyone? Am I doing an okay job of doing a high-level intro so far to people who don't understand this yet?
Are you changing slides?
I'm changing slides, but I just wanted everyone to see me as well.
So I didn't understand this. I always thought the blockchain was where the coins were mined from, not where transactions were recorded.
You're correct that Yes, you're correct. It's both, as a matter of fact. Transactions are mined. Well, it's sort of correct. Transactions are mined from an outstanding transaction pool is probably the best way of saying it. And those any transaction that's not part of the blockchain is part of the outstanding transaction pool or cache or whatever you'd like to call it. Then those transactions are picked up mostly according to how much of a mining fee has been put onto it, because miners have an economic incentive in the mining fees to scoop up the high value transactions, the high fee transactions, and include them on the blockchain.
Oh, right. So it's
That's
not
right.
options in the term of if I was to transfer my bitcoins to you or purchase
Can you speak? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, so it's not a transaction in the sense of if I was to purchase something or transfer bitcoins to you. Is that different context?
So, yes, it is. So when I say transaction, I mean if you were to transfer bitcoins to me or buy a beer or a coffee or whatever, that particular transaction will head off into the Bitcoin cloud. I really don't like that term, but the Bitcoin network, and it'll go into that pool. And then the miners, when they're building a block to add to the blockchain, will scoop up those transactions. Does that make more sense?
A little more, yeah. I'll do some reading to fill in the gaps. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic technically to get your head around, and I'm not quite sure. Let me just go back to this slide here. Another screen share. There we go. So this slide here, this would represent all the full Bitcoin nodes. And so if you can imagine pointing an arrow from a cup of coffee into one of these nodes, that's how that transaction happens. And then outside these nodes here, you'll have a mining pool or a mining computer or whatever. And that'll just say, okay, give me a list of your high value, high fee transactions. I'm going to grab those. I'm going to create my block, and I'm going to put it on the blockchain if I solve that problem. Essentially, that's what it is. Just a cache, I suppose, of unprocessed transactions.
Thanks.
That's all right. Okay, so where are we up to next? Okay.
Jason,
Yes.
can you try for us to not go into the slideshow mode in PowerPoint? Just actually
Can you speak up? I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, I'll come a bit closer.
So the slides are not quite coming through. We've got you pretty clear, but we haven't got the slides coming through clear. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I think the issue is, and I think we've had this issue before,
The
where
slides are coming through.
You're coming through, but your slides aren't.
yeah, so I think if you go into the slideshow mode, it doesn't actually go through, but we can. So we're actually sitting here while you're talking, staring at PowerPoint itself.
Yeah, so we'll
Okay.
So if you can actually go through your presentation in PowerPoint rather than playing a slideshow,
All right. Let's do that. Let's try that.
give it a try, see how it goes. Thanks.
Okay.
you change slides.
All right. Let me just try something. So what I'm seeing on this end is actually the slides. Is that better?
Yes, much.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So what I was talking about before, these nodes here represent the full, like the Bitcoin network. And if you can imagine that beer transaction sitting outside of that, and then making its way to one of those computers as you broadcast that transaction to the Bitcoin network, then one of the miners will pop up and scoop that transaction up and include it in a block. Is that better?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, cool. So let me just see. We've done that. We've done that. Okay, so a bit on the vernacular. A lot of people call it Bitcoin 2.0, and a lot of people call it blockchain 2.0. And I'm just going to pull up my speaking notes here. Okay, so when I was in Singapore, the whole Bitcoin blockchain 2.0 was a pretty hot topic. There was a whole bunch of of talks about it, and there was discussion over the right vernacular and just all this, I guess, silly academic debate. But I guess it depends on what context in which you want to speak. I like using Bitcoin 2.0 pretty much because if you're going to be producing a blockchain or a 2.0 app, then you're probably going to be using Bitcoin at this point in time because the network is so secure. However, having said that, blockchain technology using the same concepts of Bitcoin is everywhere and can be used in every way. So I got to thinking yesterday that, you know, why not call it BitChain 2.0, and it's just a generic topic a generic moniker to use across the entire 2.0 space. So whether or not you call it 2.0 or Bitcoin or blockchain 2.0 doesn't really matter, as long as you know what you're talking about. So what is Bitcoin 1.0? Bitcoin 1.0 is just transferring money to each other, the transference of value between two parties, two entities. Interesting point to note is that without Bitcoin 1.0, Bitcoin 2.0 can't exist. Bitcoin 2.0 is built on it's using the platform more than the currency transfer. But in order to use the platform, you actually need to use the currency transfer part of it. So if I wanted to, there's a particular field in a Bitcoin transaction called OP return, and if I wanted to, you can put any arbitrary data in there, I think 60 bytes or something like that. And if I was to put something in OP return, then and want that to be stuck in the blockchain forever, then the only way I can do that is by making a transfer, and mostly you just do a token transfer of fractions of a cent to make that happen. Questions? All good?
Good. Yep.
All right, cool. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Can you see all that?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So what can we do with all the BitChain 2.0 stuff? There's a whole bunch of really, really cool stuff that we can do. Eris, you can see there, this is a platform that does... Has anyone heard of smart contracts?
No.
No? Has anyone heard of digital autonomous corporations?
No.
Man, I'm going to rock your world. Smart contracts is like a traditional contract, but execution is completely automated, and creation can be automated as well, depending on the endpoints. So let's think about this. If I had a contract that would give me money each time I wanted to recycle something, then that could be a smart contract. I could build something, and I could take my plastic bottle and I could put it in a machine, and the machine could go, okay, well that's 10 cents. I'm going to credit your Bitcoin address with 10 cents. And that essentially is a smart contract. Although the contract might stipulate you can only recycle green bottles or blue bottles. So that's part of the clause in that contract where you can have essentially an if then else. If the bottle's green, well, please recycle it by all means. If it's brown, then you can't. So essentially that's a smart contract. That stuff is built on top of a blockchain as well, so it means that the contract can't be changed once it's put there. So if we think about an if-then-else statement in regular programming, anyone can change it at any arbitrary time, and because of that, it's not really a contract in a quasi-legal sense, I suppose. With the blockchain, if you're putting that set of if-then-else rules down, no one can actually change that, and the execution just becomes, I'm going to look up the rules, and I'm going to execute the contract. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
There's a lot of work in the US being done around smart contracts, and I've got some friends that are lawyers. I have friends that are lawyers. They're awesome lawyers as well. And there's a lot of... None of this has actually been tested in court in the US or in Australia yet, whether or not a smart contract is a legally binding contract. It's really interesting, but essentially the theory is that, yes, it can be upheld in court at this point in time. A digital autonomous corporation. So here's my doomsday scenario. Imagine a piece of AI, I guess, that's sitting in the cloud somewhere or other, and that AI has API access to create Amazon instances everywhere and other VPS instances wherever it likes to. It can just reach out and do that, touch it, and replicate itself. Imagine that AI now has... Actually, wind back a little bit. Last year I was at CeBIT in Sydney, and we were exhibiting, and right next to us there was a bunch of kids, and these kids had produced a 3D, not a 3D printer, but a printer that produced circuit boards on any substrate that you'd like. So they'd made the printer housing, the mechanism, they'd made everything. The only thing they'd repurposed were cartridges. And so they were printing off business cards that were actual circuits, usable circuits. So I imagine coupling that kind of printing technology with 3D printing technology, and you can essentially start printing robots. So imagine this digital autonomous corporation, someone paying it to produce a killbot to go out there and kill someone. And this is acting all independently of any human interaction. Or it can have some human interaction, so like a go button or a stop button or something like that. And then you pay that DAC with Bitcoin. And then once the job's done, it could tell its robot to go off to the recycling plant and then and destroy itself, and then be recycled into the next bot. But if you do want to think about the apocalypse and how Skynet's going to take over the world, a nicer example is a DAC that's been programmed to clean up streets. So you might have residents, a whole bunch of people in a street, and they'll all put together, $10, and I'll send it to the DAC, and the DAC will print off a robot that'll go around and vacuum the street and pick up rubbish and stuff like that. Once it's done its task, it can actually go and do the same thing, destroy its robot and recycle it. So that stuff, that infrastructure, is actually actively being built right now. It's only a matter of time. I use the colloquial 20 years or so before that kind of thing comes to fruition, but it's probably going to be sooner than that because people are working on all this stuff right now. It's just a matter of bringing it all together. Does that scare the shit out of everyone? You're braver than what I am if it doesn't. Question?
No. Where can we
No.
hide?
Go somewhere where there's no electricity.
Yeah, so where can we hide?
Middle of the Simpson. Actually, there's plenty of places out in WA that have no electricity, I would imagine. Although there is solar. Maybe we'll have to hide underground. Counterparty is another one right in the middle there. Do you see my cursor when I move it around?
Yeah.
Okay, so Counterparty is essentially, think about the New York Stock Exchange, but think about that being decentralized and, well, not necessarily regulated, but it can be regulated. So essentially, something like Counterparty is actually built on top of Bitcoin, whereas Eris is not built on top of Bitcoin, or it doesn't have to be. So Counterparty allows you to create virtual assets, digital assets, to assign to people. So I could set up Jason Corporation. I could issue 10 shares, and we can put them on Counterparty, and then issue them out to people, and you know that that person has access to that share. Then you can issue dividends, etc., etc. I always have a problem with saying this word. It's Ethereum, I think. Ethereum, that's it, Ethereum. That's kind of the platform on which you can build digital contracts, smart contracts and stuff like that. It's a pretty cool thing. And the idea behind it is essentially not quite plug and play because it's got its own language, but you can, I guess, build smart contracts programmatically, which is kind of cool. Oh, we've kind of gone over smart contracts already, haven't we? Does anyone have any questions on smart contracts? One of the things I didn't touch on with smart contracts is, can you see when I do this? Can you see that word there? With a smart contract, you have something called an oracle, and an oracle is essentially an independent, well, ideally an independent piece of software that takes inputs and provides outputs. Doesn't sound like anything particularly special, but in the context of a smart contract, what that oracle will do is it will determine whether or not those clauses have actually been successfully fulfilled before it can execute the contract. So I think, come on. In fact, what I'll do is I'll go through an example. It's a better idea. So when you buy something online right now, let me just make that a bit bigger. When you buy something online right now, what you're doing is you're giving your credit card over to a shop. That shop has to store it, has to get authorization to make sure that that payment is going to be okay. And then it's going to, once that payment's been made okay, it's going to ship the goods. The goods are going to get to your house, you're going to sign for them, and then you're going to get them. There's obviously some fairly fundamental problems with this. I guess everyone's heard of the Home Depot hack and the Target hack in the US. Yes?
No, he doesn't know.
No. So in the US, there was an attack, a hack on Target and Home Depot, and about 76 million cards were stolen, along with identities. What that means is that 76 million credit cards can now be used for fraud because they were stored somewhere and that storage place was hacked. With Bitcoin, Bitcoin's a push type of technology. This is a bit of background. A push type of technology like cash. So if I transact online with Target using my Bitcoins, if I could, then there is no way for a hacker, if they break in, to actually steal money from my Bitcoin wallet. They can use my identity in however they want, but there's no direct financial incentive there. So, in a smart contract, we take the credit cards away, obviously, and then we buy something online. We can establish a contract between the shop, the gift shop, and the delivery company, and then that contract can be executed once that delivery has been made. So how might that look in practice? And this is a flawed example, but it'll give you the idea. Let's say that I go to a shop and do you have Bunnings in WA?
Yeah.
Yep, so I go to Bunnings and I buy a hammer. The hammer has got a little GPS tracker in the handle, and I go online to Bunnings to buy the hammer. Bunnings send it to me via FedEx, and I get that. Now, once that GPS has realized that it's at my address, because I put in the delivery address when I bought it online, it'll actually broadcast something to the internet, and that this brain-looking thing here will actually get that and say, okay, great, so the hammer is now in the possession of Jason at his address, so I'm going to release the money to everyone. So the money that was tied up in that contract will now go to the delivery driver or the delivery company and Bunnings. But in that case, I wanted a red hammer, and I got a green hammer. I'm like, WTF, I don't want a green hammer. So what happens then in this smart contract situation is go out to, you'll say, no, I'm not going to authorize that. We'll go to the Oracle. Oracle will go to a third-party arbitration system. Now that's probably going to be a human-type system, but I can imagine you can automate things like that as well. So when you're doing a smart contract in an Oracle, there are exception processes, but those they're exactly like exception processes. In the mainstream, that process will actually work pretty well. One of the really good advantages of this stuff is that money is not released until the contract's executed. So that means that Bunnings has to get that hammer out into FedEx as soon as possible for them to get their money back. and then the driver of the FedEx vehicle has an actual financial responsibility or financial liability to deliver that hammer to the right place. So everyone's winning here. Cash flow may be a little bit of a problem down the track, but everyone's winning. The customer's getting the right goods, they're getting them fast, the delivery driver is not dropping stuff off at the wrong place and the customer's not getting it. Everyone is responsible because money's involved. Questions on that one? Nope. Excellent. Another idea. So one of my mates here in Sydney is Todd Byrne, and he's an ex-NRL player. And he was saying one of the real problems with the NRL and all this stuff is the salary cap. And clubs are not allowed to spend over a certain amount on their players. And to get around the salary cap, what players do is they get third-party contracts that don't involve the NRL. And some of the time that third-party contract will actually not be executed because the company's gone bust or they run out of money or for whatever other reason. So the player is putting a huge amount of effort for no reward. And I don't know if you can imagine there'll be a lot of shonky people in NRL, but apparently there are. Is there actually a team over in Perth, a rugby league team? I don't really follow sport, to be honest, but I assume that you know what I'm talking about when I say NRL. That's right, yeah? Cool. So one of the advantages of smart contracts in this context is we can have a shop, and that shop says to the player, okay, we're going to give you $50,000 over the course of 12 months, and for each time that you appear in store, you'll get a certain amount back. So you'll set up a smart contract between the player and the store, and so let's make it $1,200, and they'll get $1,000 for every month they appear in store. So just for easy math. So the player goes in and he appears in January, February, and March in store and signs footballs and T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. And that the Oracle goes out to Google and says, oh yes, there's a whole bunch of news articles of Todd Byrne going into Shop A and he's signed football, so we're going to release that tranche of money. Then what happens? The shop goes bust, and they can't fulfill the contract anymore. So the Oracle will have access to financials from that particular shop. In fact, what happens is when you sign the contract, those funds will actually be made unavailable, I suppose, is the nice way of saying it. So the funds will be tied up in the contract. So even if that shop goes bust halfway through, those funds, depending on the terms of the contract, those funds will actually be released to the player. And so no one has to worry about going to court, no one has to worry about doing anything. There's a term set out at the start and terms fulfilled at the end. Any questions so far?
Does the Oracle become the weakest link in the chain in terms of being able to be compromised?
Being able to compromise. So I suppose, let me think. I don't know. I'm not sure, to be honest. I think that there can be a lot of weak links, and the contract itself could be a weak link. So you might think of a whole bunch of things you might not think of a whole bunch of things that wouldn't happen. So, for example, let's say there's no Google news for Todd Byrne going into the shop, so the Oracle won't know. So there has to be some kinds of exceptions there on how to handle these kinds of things. So depending on how the contract's made, that could be the weak link. And this is all programming, to be honest. The Oracle could be the weak link if it's not looking for the right stuff in the right spots, I suppose.
More in terms of like me being able to feed dummy data to the Oracle to.
Well, you'd have to be a fairly smart Oracle, which I guess is what an Oracle is, what it's supposed to be. Yeah, you could, but it depends on the sources. And you would, if I was going to program an Oracle, I would be looking at multiple independent sources of getting the same information.
Thanks.
Cool. What was I going to talk about here? Okay, so this is a really interesting one, and I was talking to some people in banking again last week in Melbourne. Does anyone know what KYC is?
No.
So you know when you go to open up your bank account, open up a bank account at a brand new bank, you have to take your driver's license and your mother's, father's, husband's birth certificate and all that kind of stuff. That used to be called the old 100 points check when you're opening up a bank account. It's now called KYC, and that stands for Know Your Customer. Now, what KYC has been in since 2006 as a part of anti-money laundering, and this is a worldwide initiative handed down by FATF, which is a Financial Action Task Force, which is a global task force hell-bent on preventing money laundering and organised crime benefiting from that. One of the offshoots of that is KYC, which is Know Your Customer, and the idea is you go into your bank, you bring all your identification, the bank's satisfied with the identification, and you can then go and open up your account. But if you want to go and open up your account at Westpac and you want to go to St George, you've still got to do the same process with the same documents. But what happens if you didn't have to actually do that? That would be kind of cool, right? So the idea is that you would somehow tokenize the process of KYC. So Jason goes into Westpac, I bring in my identification, my license, passport, Medicare, and everything else, and then that would be tokenized with a private key and some nice encryption stuck on the blockchain. Now, I want to go over to St George and open up an account, which is ironic because they're all part of the Westpac group. So maybe I'll go to the Commonwealth. I'll go to the Commonwealth Bank and open up an account. The Commonwealth Bank, without talking to Westpac, will then go and look at the blockchain. I'll say, yeah, I've been KYC to Westpac before. They're going to look at the blockchain and say, okay, you have too. So if you can provide some kind of identification as to who you are, maybe just your driver's license, and what we can do is we can look at that and check your blockchain record, and okay, we're going to onboard you, and it's just that simple. The advantages of that are really good. There's a positive feedback loop because it means that customers can actually churn more between organizations that implement this type of process. And if customers are churning more, it means that service to retain your customers, then banks and those institutions are going to have to actually provide better service. And that's a big win for everyone, I think. Essentially, that is my presentation, so I'll be pleased to take questions now. Not that we didn't do questions before.
First off,
You're too kind. Is my screen still being shared?
yeah, absolutely.
Let me turn it off and I'll do that. Oh, hang on. You can still see. Can you see me or my PowerPoints?
You.
Oh, good.
That's last week.
Did that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, that's right.
Did I inspire everyone to go out and build 2.0 apps? It's really hard. You should do it anyway.
Killer robots sound pretty good.
The DACs are awesome. I think the idea behind that stuff is excellent. You can actually program a whole bunch of if-then-else things into the web and have people go to a website and do stuff, and then that DAC can go and do whatever you like, interface with other things, and just pay it with Bitcoin. I mean, the options are arbitrary, to be honest. The possibilities are endless.
As people start uptaking the blockchain and building apps on it, obviously it's going to start growing faster. Is that going to be a problem in the near future?
In a problem in terms of what?
Well, does it make it more difficult to manage the blockchain or create nodes if terabytes?
So when I started with downloading Bitcoin, well, the reference client to start off a full node, it was about 16 gigs at that point in time, and now it's up over 30. So yeah, there are storage concerns and definite challenges of doing that. Having said that, everyone is aware of all those challenges, and there's some really smart people working on how to do it. one of the options being thrown around is pruning the blockchain, so you could have a disconnect between history and current activity. So you could archive off the history somewhere or other, and still have it cryptographically secured. I mean, everyone will know that this digital signature is pertaining to this particular thing. Then you can start afresh from a known baseline.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks.
Am I on time, over time, under time? What time was I supposed to talk to?
Well, thank you very much.
About another 15 minutes, I think. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, sir.
No worries, Jason. Thanks for that.
Ha! There's another one over there. Hello. See you guys.
Yeah.
So,